The Choices Shelter is funded from a variety of funding sources. One is the Emergency Solutions Grant, and that comes from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. It is money specifically designed for homeless services. It comes from the federal government through a state agency and is allocated throughout the state to various homeless shelters and homeless prevention programs, homeless outreach programs. We do all of those things at the Choices Shelter. Another part of the funding is the Community Services Block Grant, and that is a block grant that is unique to community action agencies like CCAP. It is money that originates with the federal government in the Office of Community Services, and it also comes through a state entity that allocates the CSBG resources among 8 different agencies in the state of Kansas. In addition to that, we receive numerous donations of goods and services and some financial donations from the local community. In the past, we've had a funding portfolio, if you will, that was very, very heavy on the grants. What we would like to see in the future is to have a balanced funding portfolio that contains relatively equal part of federal and state grants and local resources, primarily through personal donations and foundation donations. Ultimately, an endowment of some sort, perhaps with the local community foundation of Southeast Kansas or perhaps through some other institution, would be ideal, because an endowment would allow for us to know that we have a sustainable income source that couldn't be necessarily threatened by federal or state politics. So we've always had strong support from community members at the shelter. People often came to donate food, donate clothing and other supplies, and to donate their time and help clean. We are now trying to carve out more volunteer opportunities. So we're trying to create structure in the shelter where it would be very easy for groups to plug in and donate their time and their talents or their treasures. We've been working with the Ministerial Alliance to design a new approach to serving homeless families at the shelter. We've been working with the United Way of Southwest Missouri and Southeast Kansas to facilitate those conversations, and other community entities are also coming to the table to have conversations about where they, their staff, or their volunteers might plug in to homeless services in Pittsburgh. One example is a partnership that's beginning to develop pretty strongly with Pittsburg State University through the communications department, the business department, the English department, and social work and psychology department, as well as women's studies. For example, with the women's studies department, they invite us to speak with them every semester about poverty and about advocacy and civic engagement. And then they follow up that guest lecture with an opportunity to engage the students in the community in a service learning opportunity. So recently we had roughly 40 students come to the Choices Shelter and donate about 2 to 4 hours total time doing some cleaning, organizing, scrubbing, window washing, and a variety of other activities that will help us get back on our feet. So homelessness is an issue in Southeast Kansas that is kind of unique in that we are a very rural community, and so the face of homelessness looks different here. We found that between 2009 and 2011, the number of people identified as living unsheltered during the last week of January, when we conduct a point-in-time count that couples along with a national effort to do the same, it tripled in those 3 years. In that count, we also discovered that close to 30% of the unsheltered individuals during that last week in January were women, and of those women, 50% of them were pregnant. I say this because it's important to recognize that this is a local problem that we're trying to address. 76% of the people who have resided at the homeless shelter come from either Crawford County or Cherokee County. So the residents who stay with us are our neighbors, they are our friends, they are our families. Roughly 320 people a year reside at the homeless shelter. This is an average over the past 5 years. And of those 320, 56% of them are children. So this is not only a local issue, it's also an issue of families. And that's why we have been specific on making Choices a shelter for families with children, because we want to make sure that our community is offering support to those children so that they might move out of poverty, move out of homelessness, and contribute back into the community. The majority of residents who become housed after residing at our shelter are housed within our community, within Crawford County and within Cherokee County. We work to make sure that residents find housing that's going to be close to their employment and close to their children's schools, because transportation is often an issue for people with very low incomes. So we want to make sure we have a successful housing rate, and we want to make sure that the recidivism rate, or the rate at which people revisit the shelter, is relatively low. If you compare Choice's recidivism rate to the national averages, we're doing a fine job. Some national averages get up into the 50s or 60s, and ours stays closer to the 20s. So we feel very proud about being able to help families find housing and then stay housed. The Southeast Kansas Community Action Program, otherwise known as CCAP, is a community action agency. Community action agencies had their birth in 1964 when Lyndon Johnson, the president at the time, signed the Economic Opportunity Act. From that came community action, which is now funded by a community services block grant. This funding flows out of the federal coffers to over 1,100 community action agencies throughout the United States that serve over 97% of the counties in the United States. CCAP itself serves 12 counties in southeast Kansas with a service area of over 7,500 square miles and close to 200,000 people living in there. 2 of those counties are frontier counties, meaning there's less than 6 people per square mile, but we also have larger populated areas with up to 20 to 30,000 people. CCAP addresses the causes and effects of poverty in a variety of ways. We ensure that people with low incomes have access to safe and affordable housing, transportation that is safe and reliable, early childhood education that is founded in best practices and child development standards. At the Choices Emergency Shelter, we are fortunate to have Jamie Crowder as the shelter manager. She's been employed at the shelter since 2006 and is the person in the community that has her finger on the pulse of homeless services and rehousing families who are experiencing homelessness. She serves not only as a resource for the families, but also as an advocate with landlords and with utility companies. She gets very creative sometimes in how she's able to house people. I've known that Jamie has even purchased tents out of her own pocket for people who were not able to house in the shelter. Jamie's commitment is apparent in everything she does, and her level of care and empathy for the families, the children, the moms and the dads that she sees come through that shelter is overwhelming and just pours out of her with unabashed appreciation for each individual that she sees.
We can provide a place for families to stay for a maximum of 90 days. During the 90 days that they're staying here in the shelter, we will work with them on whatever barriers they may have to housing and whatever obstacles have caused them to become homeless in the first place. Oftentimes, families have different reasons for ending up in this situation. Sometimes it can be the loss of a job, lack of education, any number of things, divorce, domestic violence. The list is just pretty much as broad as you could possibly think of that would cause a person to have financial problems. Those same broad subjects are the reason that people come here to the shelter. When someone comes into the shelter, we will work with them quite intensely on whatever their goals for themselves and their families may be in order to provide them that stability and that base upon which to build so that they can leave the shelter and go back into permanent housing. This shelter opened in this building for people in November of 2005.